This is about the truth.
Some see a terrorist.
The real story of this material is that it's war. It's one damn thing after another.
Some see a journalist. The media would have you see an eccentric, weird, and mysterious criminal.
In relation to my WikiLeaks work, it goes on.
We have to recognize that we can no longer allow Assange and his colleagues the latitude to use free speech values against us.
This is an unparalleled look at the journey of how one man and his mission to empower the world with information became the target of the most powerful government in the world.
10 days arbitrary detention in Wandsworth Prison in solitary, 18 months house arrest in Norwich. Julian had to seek asylum and was given asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, and that was 7.5 years, so 10 years of arbitrary detention.
What is happening here today?
What is happening here today?
Is a culmination of dreams.
It's a culmination of dreams.
From coder to convict. This is the story of Julian Assange. One man and his fight for a fair trial. One man and his quest for truth. In his teenage years living in Australia, Julian Assange found himself in the centre of a burgeoning technology-driven world. With an affinity to computers, Assange began experimenting with coding and hacking.
What hacking is having the attitude of playful cleverness. Doesn't matter just what you're doing. You could be writing computer programs, writing music, sneaking around on the roof of a building where the authorities say people aren't supposed to go, or sneaking around abandoned subway tunnels.
Someone who is so interested in things that they don't need to be pushed to investigate them rather thoroughly.
Well, hacker ethic is a series of principles that I think the hackers that I've spoken to, no matter what generation, seem to implicitly share. It's based around, I guess, a premise that you're best off when you get your hands on things to change them. It's a very active philosophy. And it's also based around the free flow of information. That information, if not free, should be as freely disseminated as possible in a spirit of sharing, in a spirit of helping everyone else improve systems.
What is hacking all about? It's all about whatever it's you. It's everything you ever wanted a computer to be. It's making love. It's being aggressive. It's stalking into the unknown and seizing the unknown and kicking it and finding out that it's exactly what you didn't intend.
It was only really after I started talking to hackers from various time periods that I realized that they shared this philosophy to some degree in common.
The year is 1989. NASA are forced to delay a launch after becoming the victim of a hack. Wank, worms against nuclear killers, infiltrated the NASA servers with the first of its kind. A political message. You talk of times of peace for all, and then prepare for war. Investigations link the hack to a group of anonymous Melbourne hackers. Though no one has been found guilty, Julian was believed to be involved. In 1993, Julian gave technical advice on 2 occasions to an Australian police child exploitation unit, which in turn assisted them with putting child abusers and pornographers behind bars. Fast forward to 2006. After becoming embroiled in the murky world of hacking, Assange saw the world with the veil pulled back. Eyewitness to the contradiction between public statements and the truth that lay on the servers in the back room, Assange looked to change the status quo. Julian Assange founded a news organization in 2006 aimed at publishing information that is in the public's interest, built on the basis of not knowing who the source is. A mission of speaking truth to power. WikiLeaks became notorious in its first few years of publishing. Whistleblowers soon started anonymously sending WikiLeaks sensitive and at times classified information from organizations all over the globe. A blind eye could not be turned to the abuses of power that were being exposed year after year by the newly founded news publishing organization. Revealing Guantanamo Bay procedures, Scientology documents.
With your help, we're gonna win.
Exposing Sarah Palin's violation of public record laws at the 2008 US election. Extrajudicial killings in Kenya. The membership list of the hateful right-wing British National Party. Disclosing Barclays Bank tax avoidance. The internet censorship lists. Revealed news of a serious nuclear accident in Iran caused by a cyber attack, hinting that a Stuxnet computer worm carried out the attack, a jointly built cyber weapon by the United States and Israel governments. And the harmful dumping of toxic substances in Africa, called the Minton Report. Culminating in a debate still present in the WikiLeaks saga. Lawyers for the commodities giant Trafigura obtained a secret super injunction against The Guardian for further publishing the contents of the Minton Report, bringing into question the privileges guaranteeing free speech established under the 1689 Bill of Rights, statutes that WikiLeaks also upholds. March 15th, 2010. WikiLeaks publishes a 32-page report on themselves conducted in secret by the United States Department of Defense for exposing human rights violations in Guantanamo Bay, the US equipment expenditure, and the battle over the Iraqi town of Fallujah. Discussed in the document are ways in which the United States can deter any current or former insiders or whistleblowers, their security interests, and the methods for marginalizing the WikiLeaks organization. Julian was in view, but what transpired next would put a target on his back. April 5th, 2010. Julian Assange caught the eye of most Americans when WikiLeaks published the Collateral Murder video, sending tremors that could be felt on Capitol Hill. Leaked by an anonymous member of military personnel, the video shows the purported murder of a dozen Iraqi men, amongst them 2 journalists, part of the Reuters news agency. On the 12th of July 2007, having been unable to identify small arms fire in a Baghdad suburb, the United States deployed 2 Apache helicopters to investigate. Through the crosshairs, we see the lead-up to the incident, the supposed misidentification of cameras as firearms, the subsequent firing on unarmed civilians, including the targeting of a truck coming to the aid of the wounded men. 2 young girls were also in the truck.
Some of the morning papers. So this is The Guardian from this morning, 14 pages about this topic. Also concurrently in Der Spiegel, 17 pages. The New York Times, I'm not sure how many, International Herald Tribune, and I believe the Telegraph also has it.
July 25th, 2010. Nicknamed the Afghan War Diary, WikiLeaks releases over 92,000 documents to The Guardian, the New York Times, and German publication Der Spiegel, disclosing friendly fire and civilian casualty incidents in the war in Afghanistan between 2004 and 2009, the scale of which can be compared to the 1970s Pentagon Papers.
There's no doubt in my mind. No doubt in my mind. We'll bring Al-Qaeda to justice, peace or no peace in the Middle East.
We're familiar with groups whose abuse we expose, attempting to criticize the messenger, to distract from the power of the message. We have tried hard to make sure that this material does not put innocents at harm.
4 days later, a 1.4 gigabyte insurance file was added to the page. Fearing that Assange or WikiLeaks were in danger, the decryption for the insurance file would be released if either got in harm's way.
I'm often asked this question: what is the most single damning revelation? What is the thing that is easily capturable? The single event, the single personality, the single mass killing. But that is not the real story of this material. The real story of this material is that it's war. It's one damn thing after another. It's clear that it will shape an understanding of what the past 6 years of war has been like, and that the course of the war needs to change. The manner in which it needs to change is not yet clear.
These documents are going to have to be poured through, analyzed, and making sure that they then match up with the media reports and what ISAF has been telling us about civilian casualties.
It is the most comprehensive history of a war to have ever been published during the course of a war.
Intelligence analyst Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning, was arrested on May 27, 2010. By March of 2011, Manning was charged with 22 violations, the most serious of which was aiding the enemy, punishable by a death sentence. Concerns by the Obama administration fueled political debate on the basis of stolen government property and the unredacted disclosure of Afghans acting as informers, potentially putting lives at risk. WikiLeaks held back on releasing all of the files in order to review and redact the sources of the information. WikiLeaks, in an attempt to morph the method, requested help from the Pentagon and human rights groups to aid in redacting the names, but received no assistance.
Where am I, go?
Right over here.
Yeah. Really?
Where are we here? You're right over here.
The monumental leak was surpassed by what the Pentagon described as the largest leak of classified documents in US military history, dubbed the Iraq War Logs. The release, made in October 2010 by Assange's WikiLeaks, disclosed just under 400,000.
Because we don't have much time, I won't speak for long. But this disclosure is about the truth. Philip Knightley, the great investigative reporter, an Australian who for the past 30 or 40 years has made the UK his home, said that the first casualty of war is the truth. But the attack on the truth by war begins long before war starts and continues long after a war ends. In our release of these 400,000 documents about the Iraq War, the intimate detail of that war from the US perspective, Iraq, as we can see, was a bloodbath on every corner of that country. The stated aims for going into that war of improving the human rights situation, improving the rule of law, did not eventuate.
In any human disaster, finding out who died and how they died is the overriding public concern. But 7 years on, the public does not have a full account of the terrible human cost of this ongoing Iraq war to the Iraqi people. What we have instead is an incomplete patchwork of stories, pictures, and data gathered by different organizations for different purposes, often published one day and forgotten the next.
Other news publishers ran with the story, focusing on the claims that the United States government had ignored torture reports and the unreported concealment of 15,000 civilian deaths. WikiLeaks was fast becoming one of the most dangerous websites. And the man behind it was now the enemy of the most powerful authority in the world: the United States government. Unearthed during the Manning trial in December 2011, Manning had used IRC and Jabber, encrypted internet conferencing services, to contact an anonymous member of WikiLeaks, believed to be Assange. Julian dismissed the allegations as absolute nonsense. The United States began their investigation of Assange and WikiLeaks, looking to prosecute under the Espionage Act of 1917 for seeking out classified information. On the contrary, no evidence was found that Assange offered Manning any direction in her leaks, raising serious questions around press freedom and First Amendment rights. During a visit to Sweden, Assange became the subject of allegations that would hang over him for years to come. 2 women claimed to have been sexually assaulted by Assange. Questioning ensued, only for the case to be suddenly closed. Julian was allowed to leave the country. 1 week later, the investigation is reinstated. Looking to resolve the issue, Assange asks to be interviewed before he leaves the country, but was told he may leave without one. Some months on, after crossing the Swedish border, authorities issue an Interpol arrest warrant, ordering the detention of the man who'd exposed wrongdoings around the globe. The warrant was lowered to suspicion of rape of a lesser degree. Assange's legal team argued that there was no such thing as minor rape, and that the allegations made do not meet the European legal definition of rape. Further efforts by Assange to be questioned in Britain, where he had been residing for 2 months, were denied.
Top 1,000 kill events.
Assange's next battle: to fight an extradition hearing to be sent back to Sweden, fearing a further extradition to the United States, where he faces possible life imprisonment or the death penalty. December 7th, 2010. Assange hands himself in to British police.
They've verified his identity. They're satisfied that he is the real Julian Assange, and we're now ready to go into the courts.
Many people believe Mr. Assange to be innocent, myself included. And many people believe that this prosecution is politically motivated.
Get back, everyone!
I think he's got a chance, yes. I fancy them, I do. I don't think it's open and shut. At this point, I'm not convinced that he has committed a crime in the United States.
Today, we learned for the very first time information about the allegations that are being made from Sweden about him. There are no charges, still no charges. He's only wanted for questioning, and we still haven't seen the allegations. And people have understood for the very first time that there is something wrong here. It's not in the state of Denmark, it's in the state of Sweden. And I think people are starting to stand up and be counted. We saw 5 very brave and honourable people stand up today to be sureties for him. 4 of them didn't know who he was, but were prepared to do so because they believed in his innocence, believed this to be wrong. And I think they are but the tip of an iceberg, and I do believe this will go viral.
Any journalist who feels anything about what we do should be supporting him 100%.
I think the charges against him are outrageous.
Why? What's the next step?
Because if you look at the case in Sweden, you know, as I've said, the chief prosecutor in Sweden throughout this case, in effect, declared it ridiculous. And it was brought back only after the intervention of a senior right-wing politician.
Who was that, sir?
That'll do.
So the resuscitation.
Finally, after 2 hours, we've heard that the Swedes won't abide by the umpire's decision. They clearly will not spare any expense but to keep Mr. Assange in jail. This is really turning into a show trial.
The fact that Julian Assange was refused bail was a gross injustice, and that has been corrected today in a limited way.
I think the attempt is designed to discredit Assange, his credibility, his morals, in order to discredit WikiLeaks as an organization. But every organization is larger than a single person within it. And WikiLeaks will survive whatever. So it was a foolish decision to try and discredit him.
During my time in solitary confinement in the bottom of a Victorian prison, I had time to reflect on the conditions of those people around the world also in solitary confinement, also on remand, in conditions that are more difficult than those faced by me. I hope to continue my work and continue to protest my innocence in this matter and to reveal, as we get it, which we have not yet, the evidence from these allegations. Thank you.
I don't have too many fears about being extradited to Sweden. There are much bigger concerns about being extradited to the United States. Those who have been following the case will have heard time and time again repeated statements that no evidence needs to be presented in this case by the prosecution. But to extradite me, no evidence is needed under European arrest warrant. In relation to my bail application, they said they did not need to present any evidence. In Sweden, every single court hearing has been in secret, and we still have not been provided with the evidence. I have provided with not a single page of information in English whatsoever. Ambassadors were tasked by Hillary Clinton to engage in espionage behavior. And that is not the first cable we have released on that subject. More serious ones, including tasking ambassadors to steal the DNA of leaders of human rights organizations in South America, including stealing the DNA of members of the UN Security Council and even Ban Ki-moon. So that's a serious change. I don't believe that that has always been the case. Of course, embassies have always been a host for espionage, but diplomats have not always been tasked to conduct espionage. That seems to be a change, and that seems to be representative of a gradual shift to a lack of rule of law in US institutions that needs to be exposed, and that we have been exposing, and that other journalists have been helping us to be exposed, and which is something that I believe that the US public does not support, the Australian public does not support, the British public does not support, the Swedish public does not support. We don't engage in ad hoc decisions. We have written policy for our public decisions, and that keeps us accountable, and we think that is the way forward in journalism that all news organizations should follow.
I think they'll have to do it, Julian, because we are late. It's a bit of
Okay.
One final question.
I'm under house arrest, so I gotta go.
With some high-profile celebrities and friends backing him, Julian was able to pay the exorbitant bail price of £240,000 and was even offered sanctuary by former army officer and war correspondent Vaughan Smith.
Well, I mean, there's a saying about battlefield friendships that it's the depth of the trench rather than the length of the time you've been living in it. And if you experience things with people, you get to know them well, and you don't necessarily have to have known them a long time.
You've got to come this way. This way. I would speak to you for hours. It's very nice to be free for Christmas and to smell the fresh air of Norfolk. Solitary confinement in the bottom of a Victorian prison is a significant experience. In a way, it's an experience I'm glad that I've had.
I've never been in prison, but I think it is important for every journalist actually writing about serious matters to be in a prison, to understand what it is like for people in prison around the world. Clearing my name is not the highest task I have. The highest task I have is to continue on with my work. We have also heard today from one of my US lawyers, yet to be confirmed, but a serious matter, that there may be a US indictment for espionage for me coming from a secret US grand jury investigation.
The backdrop for the world's most wanted houseguest. The picturesque Norfolk manor that is Ellingham Hall.
Very nice to be amongst good friends, fresh snow in the English countryside, to have my first martini in a long time. So very, very good. Of course, we have to understand that I am practically under house arrest. But of course, personally, it's a big improvement compared to being in the basement in solitary confinement. There has been many calls by senior political figures in the United States, including elected ones in the Senate, for my execution, the kidnapping of my staff, the execution of the young soldier Bradley Manning. This has been a very successful smear campaign so far, but I think its days are numbered, and people are starting to wonder, is what is claimed really true, and if it is true, where's the evidence?
For the past 5.5 months, we have been in a condition where a black box has been applied to my life. And on the outside of that black box has been written the word rape. That box is now, thanks to an open court process, being opened. And I hope over the next day we will see that that box is in fact empty and has nothing to do with the words that are on the outside of it.
I challenge you, Marianne Nye. Marianne Nye, come to London, come on Friday, subject yourself to the cross-examination by Geoffrey Robertson QC.
In relation to my WikiLeaks work, which of course is a separate topic, it goes on, it continues. Every day we are publishing serious content around the world, and especially about the Middle East. And that gives me great heart, as does the ongoing support of the world for my staff and our mission.
February 2011 marks the first loss in Assange's quest to quash the extradition.
What we saw today at Belmarsh was a rubber stamping process that comes as no surprise, but is nonetheless wrong.
And that is releasing footage of a helicopter gunship massacre of 2 Reuters journalists.
A rubber stamping process that is a result of a European arrest warrant system run amok. There was no consideration during this entire process as to the merits of the allegations made against me. No consideration or examination of even the complaints made in Sweden. And of course, we have always known that we would appeal. We have always known that in all likelihood, we would have to appeal.
Congratulations from an Irishman. I hope you win. I hope you win. We're behind you. I hope you win. Congratulations. Keep pushing on.
Let's stand up, Freddie.
Well done, Julian. Julian.
There's been a miscarriage of justice. An innocent man has been sentenced, and these two protesters are wanting to make a point about that. Julian Assange is innocent. He should not be extradited.
Manning's case, it's very clear the U.S. government is trying to crack him open with this solitary confinement by causing emotional devastation. I think they're trying to get him to issue a confession or a false confession so they can link him to Julian Assange.
The new charges are very interesting. Mr. Manning has now spent 10 months in solitary confinement, first in Baghdad, then in Kuwait, and now in Quantico, Virginia, in the United States. Amnesty International has condemned his treatment, and there are a number of calls for inquiry into it. The charges themselves, these 22 new charges, include a charge which labels him as passing information to an enemy. The naive reading of the charges would have that enemy being WikiLeaks, i.e. a publisher. So the United States appears to be setting up these charges for two purposes. Number one, to provide pressure on Bradley Manning. They're trying to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut into confessing some kind of relationship with WikiLeaks in order to embroil us into an espionage case. The other purpose of these charges is to spread across a spectrum of different types of criminality. They've been trying to crack Bradley Manning for months by making his conditions worse and worse. There's been a number of complaints by his lawyers about that matter, and Amnesty International has complained about his treatment. Bradley Manning is not speaking, and Bradley Manning is exercising his right to silence, and they're trying to force him into a plea deal. And most legal commentators believe that kind of plea deal would involve him in saying something that would help the United States prosecute this organization for espionage or some other criminal matter that it could be embroiled in. So that is wrong. The requirements given by some of those charges is that WikiLeaks is the enemy of the United States, that a publisher is the enemy of the United States. And nothing in our 4 years of publishing shows that that is in any way true. We publish from all countries who come to us. We are not an enemy of the United States, and it is an abuse against Mr. Manning and an abuse against us to suggest otherwise.
October 15th, 2011. Assange was next seen at the anti-capitalist protest Occupy London. But nothing is straightforward for the man who had published the largest leak of classified material ever seen.
We're blocked from speaking at the moment, but we'll try and negotiate a way through. WikiLeaks has been most attacked, not by military organizations or intelligence organizations, but actually numerically by banks. This is an infamous tactic used by the MET called kettling, which doesn't have an analogy in many other democratic countries. It is to enclose enclose protesters in tight, small groups prior to any sort of accusation of violence activity. So in this particular example, you see what is an entirely political protest about the big banks being denied its ability to express itself. And it's very important in a democracy that people see that they have the numbers, that they see that their opinion is shared by other people in the community. And this form of kettling prevents people coming to a protest, people in the community seeing that their values are actually a majority. So that's why it's an anti-democratic process. Why we can all understand that certain actions need to be taken in response to true violence. There is no hint of violence at all, and I spoke to police earlier today. They said it had all been completely calm, good day, good weather, good people. In 2007, I lived in Cairo, and I and my friends in Cairo were all too well aware of the behavior of the Mubarak regime, with 20,000 political prisoners. It seemed impossible that anything could change. But through courage, determination, and professionalism, we did see a change. We saw the end of the Mubarak regime. And while the situation in the West is different in important respects to that faced by people in the Arab Spring, there are also similarities. While ideas from the Western Enlightenment entered into the pan-Arab states and gave those activists hope, and technology allowed them to organize better, we in the West have a lot to learn also from the successes of people in the Arab Spring. Their determination and professionalism in response to years of abuse and torture led eventually to the overthrow of Mubarak and the overthrow of Ben Ali and reforms in Morocco and throughout many countries in the region. What is happening here today?
What is happening here today?
Is a culmination of dreams.
Is a culmination of dreams.
That many people all over the world have worked towards from Cairo to London.
WikiLeaks has published the biggest leaks in journalistic history. This has triggered aggressive retaliation from powerful groups. Since the 7th of December 2010, an arbitrary and unlawful financial blockade imposed by the Bank of America, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and Western Union has destroyed 95% of our revenue. It came as part of a concerted US-based political attack that included vitriol by senior right-wing politicians in the United States and high-level calls for the assassination of WikiLeaks staff and myself personally.
November 2011. Assange loses his appeal against extradition.
I have not been charged with any crime in any country. Despite this, the European arrest warrant is so restrictive that it prevents UK courts from considering the facts of a case, as judges have made clear here today. We will be considering our next step in the days ahead. This afternoon, the Parliament of the United Kingdom is considering in depth the matters that arise from various extradition cases in the United Kingdom, including my own. Today, the High Court has decided that an issue that arises from my own case is of general public importance and may be of assistance to other cases and should be heard by the Supreme Court. I think that is a correct decision and I am thankful. The long struggle for justice for me and others continues. Thank you.
The case is destined for the highest court in the land. Seven months on, the Supreme Court upholds the decision to extradite.
it makes the law, to me, seem rather shabby, actually. And I'm not talking about simply because they found against Assange. It is their arguments, which are not based on MPs understood the law to be when they passed this extradition legislation in 2001.
June 2012. Fearing an extradition to the United States from Sweden for his alleged crimes of procuring classified information, Mr. Assange breaches his bail conditions by walking up the steps of the Ecuadorian embassy, taking refuge inside, giving Assange assurance he could not be detained by British police as long as he doesn't set foot outside.
So, the situation we confront today now is a stalemate. There is a confrontation which is not of our choosing, because the right to claim asylum is the right of any citizen anywhere in the world.
August 19th, 2012. Julian addresses his supporters in the assembled media from the balcony of the embassy with a message for the American establishment.
The US administration's war on whistleblowers must end. I thank President Correa for the courage he has shown in considering and in granting me political asylum. On Wednesday night, after a threat was sent to this embassy and police descended on this building, you came out in the middle of the night to watch over it. And you brought the world's eye with you. Inside this embassy after dark, I could hear teams of police swarming up into the building through its internal fire escape. But I knew there would be witnesses, and that is because of you. There is unity in the oppression. There must be absolute unity and determination in the response. Thank you.
The Ecuadorians are the only people who have properly looked at the idea that Julian might be threatened, that his rights are being threatened, that he's in danger, physical danger, of being sent to America.
We will not allow Mr. Assange safe passage out of the United Kingdom.
We seem quite incapable of appreciating and acknowledging that in London, Julian Assange has gone to the Ecuadorian embassy and he has got political asylum. And I think that there's an opportunity to reflect on that. And if we are really the tolerant people that we think we are, we should do that.
6 months on from breaking bail, with Christmas fast approaching, Assange addressed the crowds from his window once more.
Good evening, London. What a sight for sore eyes. 6 months ago, 185 days ago, I entered this building. It has become my home, my office, and my refuge. I came here in summer. It is winter now. I have been sustained by your solidarity, and I'm grateful for the efforts of people all around the world supporting the work of WikiLeaks, supporting freedom of speech, freedom of the press, essential elements in any democracy. While my freedom is limited, at least I am still able to communicate this Christmas, unlike the 232 journalists who are in jail tonight. It is from the revelation of truth that all else follows. Our buildings can only be as tall as their bricks are strong. Our civilization is only as strong as its ideas are true. When our buildings are erected by the corrupt, when their cement is cut with dirt, when pristine steel is replaced by scrap, our buildings are not safe to live in. And when our media is corrupt, when our academics are timid, when our history is filled with half-truths and lies, our civilization will never be just. It will never reach to the sky.
June 2013.
So to sum up, we said that granting political asylum would be ineffective if there were not the corresponding recognition of the guarantee of safe conduct in line with protection of human rights. We discussed this issue with the British Foreign Ministry, which is also concerned about the risk of the subsequent extradition which may occur of Mr. Assange from Sweden to the United States. And this is one of the reasons why Ecuador has granted political asylum. Our concerns have worsened, particularly in light of what has been occurring in the context of Bradley Manning. And so, together with the UK, we wish to explore the possible mechanisms which we can use to make sure that Sweden would not extradite Mr. Assange subsequently.
July 2014. Air around the embassy was filled with disappointment as news surfaced that Interpol's arrest warrant would be upheld. Incarcerated inside the embassy for over 2 years now, Assange's hope of freedom was further diminishing.
The reality is Julian Assange is a political prisoner. He's a dissident in our country, and we're just not really used to that. This wouldn't be happening. There wouldn't be these police outside this embassy if it wasn't Julian Assange, if he wasn't a public person. Nobody else would get this.
August 2014. Rumours emerge that the WikiLeaks founder may need hospital treatment.
It is an environment in which any healthy person would find themselves soon enough with certain difficulties.
March 2015. After years of no progress, held up in confinement, Swedish prosecutors asked to interview Julian inside the embassy, only for it to be cancelled a few months later, according to the founder of the whistleblowing publication. August 13th, 2015. After the legal time limit had passed, 2 of the 3 sexual allegations were dropped. The more serious rape allegation remains. From the moment Assange strode up the steps in June 2012 to October 2015, the United Kingdom have spent in excess of £13 million, an expenditure somehow rationalised by the government. A small victory came to Assange in the form of recognition, having won UN backing. January 2016. A UN working group panel on arbitrary detention supports Assange.
Good afternoon, everyone. So finally we have the verdict of the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. And they issued a very detailed opinion which considers all arguments from Sweden and the United Kingdom. And this decision dispels the myth that Mr. Assange is either a fugitive from justice or that he could just walk out of the embassy. It is a damning indictment of the manner in which this case has been handled. It further affirms that Mr. Assange is a victim of a significant miscarriage of justice that is attributable to the action and inaction of both Sweden and the United Kingdom. It further emphasized Julian's continued willingness to cooperate with the investigations in this case at all stages of the procedure.
Well, I reject the finding of this working group. It's a group made up of lay people, not lawyers, and their conclusion is flawed in law. Julian Assange is a fugitive from justice. He's hiding from justice in the Ecuadorian embassy. He can come out onto the pavement anytime he chooses. He's not being detained by us. But he will have to face justice in Sweden if he chooses to do so, and it's right that he should not be able to escape justice. This is frankly a ridiculous finding by the working group, and we reject it.
I mean, I'm very concerned that they would term the United Nations decision as ridiculous. Well, the United Kingdom is a member of the Security Council. It's one of the founding members of the United Nations system. I would expect that they will want to uphold the very system that they created.
What right does this government, or the US government, or the Swedish government have to deny my children their father for 5.5 years?
Yes, shame on our government.
May 2016. Photographs of a new arrival inside the embassy appear. Given to him by his children, the embassy cat gave a much-needed respite from the political storm surrounding Assange. November 2016. Swedish authorities interview Assange in the embassy, lasting 2 days.
Yes, we can.
Outgoing US President Barack Obama decides to free WikiLeaks key whistleblower Chelsea Manning, formerly Bradley Manning. January 19th. Assange stands by his offer of extradition to the United States, provided his rights are protected.
In 10 days, the world will witness a hallmark of our democracy. The peaceful transfer of power from one freely elected president to the next.
What are we going to do? We're going to make America great again. You watch. I'm the messenger. I'm just really the messenger. Although I've been a very good messenger, let's face it, right? I've been a pretty good messenger.
January 20th. Donald Trump wins the presidency. In the lead up to the election, Assange is cut off from the world, both physically and technologically. Ecuador cut the internet over fears he may have been meddling in the US elections. April 21st, 2017. The new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, sets his agenda, declaring Assange's arrest is a priority.
While the Department of Justice does not discuss ongoing investigations or confirm specific matters, it is important for the American people and those who might be thinking about leaking classified or sensitive information to know that criminals who would illegally use their access to our most sensitive information to endanger our national security are in fact being investigated and will be prosecuted. Since January, the department has more than tripled the number of active leak investigations compared to the number pending at the end of the last administration.
First, the days like today, where we call out those who grant a platform to these leakers and so-called transparency activists. We know the danger that Assange and his not-so-merry band of brothers pose to democracies around the world. Ignorance or misplaced idealism is no longer an acceptable excuse for lionizing these demons. Second, there are steps that we have to take at home. In fact, this is a process that we have already started. We've got to strengthen our own systems, secure our own stuff. We've got to improve our internal mechanisms that help us in our counterintelligence mission. We need to be as clever and innovative as the enemies we face, because they will not relent. and we will not either. Third, we have to recognize that we can no longer allow Assange and his colleagues the latitude to use free speech values against us. To give them the space to crush us with misappropriated secrets is a perversion of what our great Constitution stands for. It ends now.
The persecution of him is completely wrong. The threats against him are completely wrong. They should be withdrawn. He should be freed. He shouldn't have to be imprisoned.
May 19th, 2017.
Today is an important victory for me and for the UN human rights system. But it by no means erases 7 years of detention without charge in prison, under house arrest, and almost 5 years here in this embassy without sunlight. 7 years without charge, why my children grew up without me. That is not something that I can forgive. It is not something that I can forget. But let us understand, while today was an important victory and an important vindication, the road is far from over. The war, the proper war, is just commencing. The UK has said it will arrest me regardless. Now, the United States, CIA Director Pompeo and the US Attorney General have said that I and other WikiLeaks staff have no rights. We have no First Amendment rights, and that my arrest and the arrest of our other staff is a priority. That's not acceptable. WikiLeaks will continue its publications. The United Kingdom, the European Union, is a party to the 1951 Convention on Refugees. It states that it adheres to the right for all people to seek asylum, to receive asylum, and to enjoy asylum. I have that right in a political case. We all have that right. So the claim by the United Kingdom that it has a right to arrest me for seeking asylum in a case where there have been no charges, which has now been dismissed, is simply untenable. The UK refuses to confirm or deny at this stage whether a US extradition warrant is already in the UK territory. How can it be that a journalist and publisher operating from Europe can be extradited to the United States? We don't operate in the United States. We don't publish from the United States. So that's a threat to all journalists around the world, wherever they operate, that if they expose serious abuses occurring in the national security domain, there's a threat to extradite them, or indict their organization or their staff. Okay, that's it. Thanks, guys.
With one obstacle out of the way, another was just coming into view.
Gracias por darme la oportunidad de servirlos.
With Lenin Moreno in power, who knew the fate of Julian Assange? In the midst of the unrest in Catalonia, Assange tweets his support for independence and accuses Madrid of repression. Having been warned by the new president Moreno not to interfere in Allied politics, life inside the embassy was becoming increasingly strained. Still bereft of sunlight and cut off from the world, Assange spent some of 2018 in silence as noisy accusations of his ties to Russia's involvement in the 2016 US election were being constructed. March 2018. For the second time, Assange's internet access and communications are cut off, barring any connection to the outside world. October 2018. Assange launches a legal case, accusing the newly formed government, headed by Moreno, of violating his fundamental rights and freedoms. Having had new rules imposed on him, designed to force him out of the embassy, ruling a week later that legal action cannot move forward. With his rights in doubt, Julian remained at the embassy awaiting his fate. January 2019.
So my relationship with Julian, a friendship, goes back to 2000. We're active in Australia in the peace and justice movement. I was in prison in the United States for a year in the early 90s for disabling a B-52 bomber with 3 other people, Catholic pacifists. And at that point, Julian was 17 and had released the wankworm. That's when he was an activist. A few years later, he was arrested and charged with 36 offences for hacking. Now, he grew up and he moved on from activism, and he started WikiLeaks in 2006 after being a single father and raising a child from 17 to 34. 130 days ago, I came here feeling that his extraction from this building was inevitable and imminent. And I've been here 130 days. The only thing the British are after him for is a breach of bail. And usually bail is related, you've been charged with something, you've got to turn up to court. But he hasn't been charged with anything. The Swedes finished their investigation and didn't charge him. So it's just a subterfuge to do what the Americans want, really. Which is what the Australians do and the Irish do, so don't feel bad about it. I mean, it's an empire, you know. When the Americans say jump, the British, the Irish, the Australians go, how high do you want us to jump? Who do you want us to land on? And how hard do you want us to land on? Yeah, it's tragic. It's like a slow motion crucifixion.
April 2019. With ties becoming strained between the WikiLeaks founder and the new government, it became increasingly more likely Assange would be extradited. Subsequently, looking at spending the rest of his life rotting in solitary confinement in a United States prison cell.
It's April 10th, and this phase, my solidarity with Julian of being here 24 hours, 7 days a week. But I was at the first court appearance of Julian when he walked in voluntarily to Kentish Town Police Station, December 7, 2010. Well, different people have different entry points. I'm a bit dyslexic, I'm not very techie, and my entry point is as an anti-war activist. I'm part of the pacifist Catholic worker movement that's been going since the 30s. People were jailed in World War II for anti-conscription. We were the first people to burn draft cards publicly in the early part of the Vietnam War. And then 2 priests, Daniel and Philip Berrigan, led a draft board raid movement where people, nuns and priests and laity, would break into draft boards and destroy draft files. And it's kind of interesting because Dan and Phil were on the front page of Time magazine in 1968, like Julian was in 2010, and then Hoover and Nixon had a meeting about how to marginalise them. And I'm sure similar meetings have happened about Julian, and they were quite successful in both instances of undercutting any support and marginalising. Some of my prison conditions in different places have been worse and some have been better. The most significant part of it being worse is this is sensory deprivation. There's no change in heat or cold, no ability to see more than 5 metres, no healthcare access. So it's changed. There was like 4 or 5 different ambassadors since he went in there. And they sacked the ambassador and half the staff in December, probably because they thought that they were too sympathetic, and they've just made the environment much more toxic. Like there's a live feed to keto from in that building. There's more and more cameras. That's what we hear from John Pilger and others who visited. So they're trying to push him out, and they're having difficulty because he's an Ecuadorian citizen. So a leak happened last week from within the government that he had hours or days left. And if that leak had not happened, he would probably be gone by now. But on Friday, 40 media turned up, and now there's just one guy from roughly doing 24/7. He won't surrender. He'll be dragged out eventually, and he'll be put in prison here, facing extradition. He'll fight that. What I hope to do is move there and try and get a support group going around the prison. And because as a former prisoner, I know the significance of solidarity, basically. They've set up protocols hoping he'll break them. I believe that one of them is he can't come to the window, you know. So he's only ever spoken 4 times from the balcony. Yeah, so there's good people everywhere, and that was my feeling in prison too, that it is a bit like prison in the sense that I'm restricted to a certain area, but you find good people everywhere, and you know, you find threats everywhere too. Apparently WikiLeaks have found one this morning. So yeah, you know, there's news that they've been infiltrated or something like that.
April 10th, 2019. News emerges of an extensive spying campaign orchestrated on Assange.
Let me just begin with telling you the basics. The new and unexpected thing that just came into light in the last few days is that WikiLeaks uncovered an extensive spying operation against Julian Assange within the Ecuadorian embassy. It entails a total invasion of privacy of Mr. Assange. What we have established is that security cameras were used to monitor his every move, his every meeting with visitors.
One thing is absolutely clear. With the new government, Ecuador is not protecting Julian anymore. It's not protecting him as it should, since it granted him political asylum. Quite the contrary. The government is making everything possible to end the asylum. And the only reason why it hasn't happened yet is because the international shame, the historic shame that will be entitled to Ecuador.
We know since January that there was a request by the US government to Ecuador to allow the interrogation of diplomats that worked in the Ecuadorian embassy in relation to an ongoing investigation, criminal investigation, into WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And we know that the Ecuadorian government did comply. We also know that there was a request to hand over visitors' logs from the embassy and video recordings from within the security cameras in the embassy. So we assume that this material, this extensive material that has been gathered, has been handed over to the Trump administration.
Let's remember that Julian Assange is not serving any sentence. He doesn't have any charges. He is a political refugee. Political refugees do not lose rights. On the contrary, they should have the rights protected. What we have here is a clearly human rights violation of a journalist.
And the Moreno government in Ecuador has been all too willing to help out by pushing Julian Assange out of the embassy. This attempt to have this done has been escalating in the last few weeks and even days. And even last week we heard that it was from very reliable sources, on Friday that it was imminent that he would be evicted from the embassy and arrested on Lenin Moreno's order, the president of Ecuador. The only reason why this was averted, in our opinion, is the fact that we learned about it and we were able to publish that information. That was the only reason why that was stopped, probably temporarily.
When I came here 138 days ago, whatever it was, I expected him to be lifted that night. So they've obviously backed off because of the leak. The more observing that's going on, the more present, the safer it is for Julian. So it's good. At the moment, there seems to be about 5 people here, which is good, because often it's just me. That red car there, that's probably embassy police. They're armed, and they do a circuit every hour, but they've been back about 4 times in the past hour now. 2 nights ago, van pulled up right in front of me, and another cop got out with a machine gun. And part of it's just to stress him out mentally, you know, it's a kind of low-intensity conflict on his mental health and all that. I would think this Lenin Moreno, who seems to be keen to turn Ecuador back into a US colony, and, you know, the history of South America and the United States post-World War II is the US toppling democratic government after democratic government and putting military juntas in. It's a toxic, hostile staff now compared to what preceded it. Like, he was invited in by the President of Korea, who now has an arrest warrant issued on him. You know? So the President who invited him in is now at large trying to get asylum in Belgium. So this place has gone from a sanctuary to a trap. And the special branch are here 24/7, and they're probably in number 18, that's my guess. And there's no way to do a runner from here, you know. Well, what does it mean for journalism? You know, like Chomsky calls mainstream journalists the stenographers of power, which is this, you know, real journalism is questioning the story behind the story, and yeah, the lack of transparency just leads to corruption. Everything can become corrupt. Christianity, communism, capitalism, democracy, feminism, you know. So you've got to have transparency and power to be held to account. Yeah, it's the death of free expression. He's very resolute and he's very convinced with the significance of his work, but obviously he's starved of intellectual stimulation, which he thrives on. No one could argue that he could be a multimillionaire, poolside Silicon Valley, and he's decided to, you know, give the gifts I believe God gave him to expose the rich and powerful who wage constant war on the poor, and, you know, that's pretty impressive. It's very similar to the story of John the Baptist in that sense that you had a collaborator king, a Jewish king, Herod, who wanted to appease the empire, Roman, happens to be American now, and delivered the head of a prophet. And what is a prophet? A prophet doesn't necessarily have to be a really nice guy, that's a saint. A prophet is someone who speaks truth to power. And as Oscar Wilde, who used to live in this building, said, if you tell people the truth and don't make them laugh, they'll want to kill you. So Julian probably needs a gag writer.
April 11th, 2019. In the early hours of the morning, to avoid any commotion on the wealthy streets of Knightsbridge, a frail and weak Assange is carried down the very steps he walked up over 7 years ago, after the Ecuadorian government saw fit to invite the British police inside.
They must resist! UK resist!
No worries. Seen en Rutley. Media campaigns to discredit the infamous publisher evolved. Leaked videos from inside the Ecuadorian embassy and comments made by Moreno's embassy staff on his personal hygiene gave the government enough ammunition to rid themselves of Assange, handing him over to the British police. A stark contrast to the government that provided his asylum.
Those allegations are a smear campaign, smoking screen made by the government in order to cover the fundamental thing. The fundamental thing here is that Ecuador has handed over a political refugee to his persecutors. Ecuador has breached every single legislation on political asylum and refugee there is. So that's in a sense a crime. And in order to cover that, they need to bring the attention to something else. It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. It was basically a kidnapping. He didn't walk by his own will outside that embassy. He was dragged by force. He refused, and he was right to refuse. He became Ecuadorian during this time. That was his embassy. According to the Ecuadorian constitution, no Ecuadorian could be extradited, ever.
Happy day. Well, look at that.
Last one.
Can I say we're very grateful to the ambassador and to President Moreno for bringing this to a conclusion. I think everyone is pleased that this has finally come to an end, and I think it'll signal ever-improving relations between the United Kingdom and Ecuador, and we look forward to such increased activity over the years ahead. So thank you once again, Ambassador. Thank you. Thank you.
Meanwhile, in the United States, the indictment showing Julian's charges is unsealed, revealing the charge to be a conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. No new information is disclosed.
Now, you have all probably heard about the indictment and the nature of the indictments, which I think are very revealing about the nature of this entire case. It is based 17, as was pointed out, of the indictments on the Espionage Act, which is an archaic legal framework from the World War I period, and has never in its 102 years history been used against a publisher and a journalist. Never before.
What is now going on is that the United States is, of course, furious. It's a furious elephant in the room, breaking everything. It's furious, and it's violating a lot of fundamental rights.
This is a watershed moment for the preservation of journalism. This is about press freedom. The Assange case and this extradition request in this case is more than just something pertains to one person or one organization. This is about the future of press freedom in our part of the world, where we have been rather privileged with relatively good standing. It is a crackdown on press freedom, nothing less.
Publishing of documents, of videos of the killing of innocent civilians, exposure of war crimes. This is journalism. It's called conspiracy. It's conspiracy to commit journalism.
I have faith in the British justice system, and I think he will argue that this is a breach of his right of freedom of speech, which we uphold to an extent, to throw him to the American wolves, who are determined to jail him for a long time. So, yes, I've got faith that the British justice system may prevent that. As to the American justice system, ending up in a Supreme Court in a few years with a majority of Trump appointees, I'm not so sure.
May 1st, 2019. Southwark Crown Court. Assange is handed a 50-week jail sentence for breaching bail.
To get a sentence only 2 weeks short of the maximum sentence is an outrage. It's almost double the sentencing guideline. And may I point out, just in comparison, that the so-called speedboat killer got 6 months for not showing up in court to hear his sentencing for manslaughter. But the fight continues. Tomorrow is the big fight, the start of the big and most important fight, to fight against the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. What is at stake there could be a question of life and death for Mr. Assange. It is also a question of life and death for a major journalistic principle.
May 2nd, 2019. Assange appears via video link in one of the smallest courtrooms at Westminster Magistrates. With the session only lasting 10 minutes, a new procedural hearing date is set. This is a matter of life and death for Assange. May 7th, 2019. Visitors of Julian approached the assembled media outside Belmarsh prison.
I think I speak for both of us that we are quite emotional after this first social visit that Julian's allowed after having been in here for a month.
Obviously, it's been very difficult to see Julian here, and to make our way through the prison to get to him was quite shocking and difficult. He does not deserve to be in a supermax prison. He has never committed a violent act. He's an innocent person. You know, justice will depend on public support.
I guess he lost about 20 pounds, at least.
The visiting hours are very, very precious. Sorry, I'm a bit upset. Julian is a gentle intellectual in a maximum security prison. It's just very moving to see Julian, particularly in those circumstances of coming out of sick bay and having lost 10 kilograms weight. Considerable change. I mean, losing weight and being a little ill is a big change. But fighting spirit's there and still bossy.
May 23rd, 2019. Assange is accused of 17 new charges brought forward by the Justice Department. The indictment states that Mr. Assange had repeatedly encouraged sources with access to classified information to steal and provide it to WikiLeaks to disclose. No evidence was shown. May 30th, 2019. News is released that Assange is too ill to attend the hearing. Resurfacing rumours of his poor health, even signs of psychological torture. The complicated extradition process, which involves both Sweden and the United States and deals with press freedom and national security issues, is expected to last for months or years to come. June 11th, 2019. United States submit an extradition request. Sajid Javid confirms and signs the request, setting up the extradition case in 2020. The very case he fears most.
Because of the cruelty of the British government, he hasn't been allowed even to go to hospital for a day to get his chest scanned. He has a bad chest condition, according to specialist doctors, and so that has not been allowed. It may be allowed in a British prison hospital, but the conditions in an American supermax prison are quite horrific, and his freedom and his spirit may well be broken. He has a strong spirit, a spirit which is determined to publish whatever he comes across or is sent to him which is of public interest. And remember that history books are now being informed by WikiLeaks revelations. Hardly a week goes by without the news based on some WikiLeaks revelation. So he's sacrificed a lot for his belief in freedom of speech, and the issue will be whether our judges, and perhaps eventually American judges, have the same belief, or whether they're hypocrites.
This deep disparity with the US is about to be laid bare when the courts decide whether the WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange will be extradited to the US on charges of espionage for exposing war crimes, the murder of civilians, and large-scale corruption. Will the Prime Minister agree with the parliamentary report that's going to the Council of Europe that this extradition should be opposed and the rights of journalists and whistleblowers upheld for the good of all of us?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to comment on any individual case, but it is obvious that the rights of journalists and whistleblowers should be upheld, and this government will clearly continue to do that.
February 24th, 2020. Crowds gather at Woolwich Crown Court in support of the brave publisher.
I'm the angel of democracy, and nobody knows more about democracy than Julian Assange. It's not a crime to publish American war crimes. It's in the interests of democracy.
Robert Gates, ex-Secretary of Defense, before Congress in testimony said that it's awkward, embarrassing, but no damage was done. I'll note that the prosecutor didn't give one example of a broken fingernail. Just he said that sources were in danger. Well, simply not true.
Yeah, thank you. As John said, it's only a 10-minute break now, so it's going to be short. But what was presented here was an overwhelming evidence of how politicized the entire process has been. Ed Fitzgerald presented very compelling evidence of how it was decided under Obama not to prosecute because of the impossibility of singling out one publisher, WikiLeaks, one journalist, Julian Assange, and not publishing, not going after others who were actually part of that project, the New York Times problem, as it was called. It was laid out here how then, after Trump came to power, every avenue was sought to actually go after Julian Assange. That is apparent from quotes from Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, from Mike Pompeo in 1917, when he started depicting WikiLeaks as a hostile intelligence service. And of course, by this amazing revelation that Congressman Dana Rohrabacher made an offer to Julian Assange that if he would reveal his source of the 2016 DNC leaks, they would bring back the message to Donald Trump and secure leniency or pardon. Of course, that offer was denied. There was no doubt about it that Congressman Rohrabacher and his colleague at that meeting were saying that they were acting under instruction by full knowledge of President Trump in making that offer. That is extraordinary. Only when that offer was declined, the process of formulating indictments, of getting the hands on Julian Assange started in full earnest. And we know how that all ended. What was, of course, astonishing to hear, that, and we will hear more of, is the revelation that the security company, the private security company hired to look after the interest of Julian, was again rehired by the funder of Donald Trump, Las Vegas casino magnate Sheldon Adelson, to spy on Julian. And evidence will be produced by whistleblowers from that company who will anonymously bear witness in this court how they spied on everything and they knew exactly who they were working for. It was US intelligence. It's the dark side, they said internally in between themselves. They were spying on the legally privileged conversation between Julian and his lawyers, and everything almost in real time was transported back to intelligence agencies in the US. There was even discussion among the staff in the embassy that more extreme measures would possibly be taken apart from this spying on Julian, namely kidnapping or poisoning.
February 25th, 2020. News breaks of the inhumane care the founder of WikiLeaks is receiving. February 26, 2020. Sitting in a bulletproof box, unable to be properly engaged in the proceedings, Assange's lawyer revealed to the court that he is now on medication, fueling further rumours of his weakening health. February 27th, 2020.
The mainstream media came here for the opening statement of the prosecution. Yeah. They copy and pasted from the prosecution thing saying Mr. Assange is a common criminal. And then they all went home, even before the defense started. So I'm afraid that simply tells us what we already knew about the mainstream media. Anyway, thank you.
It's not a fair hearing. It's not a fair hearing if one side is more armed than the other. If one side can go back and forth with their lawyers and discuss the route that they need to take or point out that things might be factually incorrect, it will have an equally chilling effect on both whistleblowers and publishers, because it sets the precedent that it doesn't matter where you are reporting from, it doesn't matter who gives you the documents, none of that matters. If you do something that another state doesn't like, they can reach out their extraterritorial arm and pluck you from that country and throw you into a hole in theirs. So in this case, we have an Australian publishing in Europe and the United Kingdom being sought by the United States, where he's looking down the barrel of 175 years in prison. They've already stated that they'll keep him under what they call SAMs, Special Administrative Measures. We understand how the United States government works with their terminology. They talk about enhanced interrogation techniques, which is a synonym for torture. SAMs is a synonym for solitary confinement and isolation. He wouldn't be allowed to speak to his family. He would only be allowed to speak to his lawyer, and his lawyer wouldn't be allowed to convey anything that he said to the public without his lawyer themselves being thrown into prison.
John Shipton, Julian Assange's father, here outside Belmarsh with the supporters. This is the fourth day. The story continues to unfold as some sort of fraud upon the courts by the Department of Justice in the United States, because they have all of their evidence has been proved to be, as our barrister says, lies, lies and more lies. Extraordinary. This abrogation of Julian's human rights started 10 years ago with 10 days arbitrary detention in Wandsworth prison in solitary. Then after that, 18 months house arrest in Norwich. After that, Julian had to seek asylum and was given asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, and that was 7.5 years of arbitrary detention.
Can you hear me?
Now, after the United Kingdom contravened its own conventions to arrest Julian without the revocation of the asylum that was given him, they arrested him and charged him with skipping bail, and has been in Belmarsh maximum security prison for about 10 months now. So 10 years of arbitrary detention. You don't have to take my word for it. There's a working group, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, their determination. There's the secondary report in February 2018 from the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. There's Nils Melzer, the UN rapporteur on torture. His conclusions that Julian had been psychologically tortured, deliberately, smeared, mobbed. There's also the United Nations rapporteur on privacy. His determination that Julian's privacy had been stolen from him. There's the illegal surveillance by UC Global on behalf of the CIA. This just goes on and on. You know, I just take each day as it comes and do what I can to ensure that Julian comes home to his family. That's all.
Court proceedings are adjourned, with 3 weeks of evidence scheduled on May 18th. Julian Assange, the enemy of America for nearly 15 years, lies in Belmarsh prison awaiting his fate. Fate that will have grave implications across the media-driven world, from whistleblowers to journalists. Fate that will change the way stories can be investigated. Fate that will be decided in the months to come. From coder to convict, Assange has brought information and injustices to light that would otherwise be stored and forgotten. Whether you support or shun his methods, undoubtedly his revolutionary publishing has changed the way journalism is conducted, holding governments that act in our name to a definitive account. With ailing health and the coronavirus pandemic in full swing, doctors expressed fear that Assange may not see the light of day again.
I think it's important to remember at this time that as we go back out into the world, we leave these happy headlands, this open-faced setting with all these happy hills. We remember that the world of tomorrow is not going to be like the past. And the networks we move into are going to be threatened by the KGB, the CIA, Sears Roebuck, and any number of strange, ostensibly honest, suspicious entities whose very nature and motivations must be very carefully scrutinized. So it's up to the entire public to defend itself, to look to the extension of freedom of privacy, freedom of information, freedom of association, and all the things that have made America great in this strange, new, and dark network world.